The hunger strike at Guantanamo Bay is continuing to grow. The Pentagon says 19% of the 166 prisoners there are starving themselves, and it's reportedly force-feeding 10 of them to keep them alive. At least 3 have been hospitalized for dehydration. Many of those detainees have never had their day in court. Some have been locked up for more than 10 years without a trial.
Military personnel choose their jobs, but they don't choose their mission. And I think there's a big misconception out there, and it feeds into your question, in that, I describe in my book, Saving Grace in Guantanamo Bay, that it's like an emotional train wreck, especially for the medical personnel, because we're trained to heal the whole person. And yet we have folks that we were told when we first got there were the worst of the worst and were responsible for us being away from our families and away from home. So I think what's missed a lot in the mainstream media is that these detainees have world-class medical care from the absolute best of the best, technicians, doctors, nurses. I'm a medical service officer, not a medical professional, but someone who is responsible for oversight of Geneva Conventions and law of land warfare. And the Geneva Conventions did not apply to these folks until Don Rumsfeld said it did.
I want to clear up the idea that these people who are engaging in the hunger strike are the worst of the worst. In fact, the majority of the people who are participating in the hunger strike are people who have been cleared for release by the Obama administration, many of them by the Bush administration, and several of them by the U.S. Federal District Court have actually won their cases in habeas corpus. So these are the detainees who are being held in Camp 6 because actually they're not terrorists. They're not war criminals. In many cases, they are not even enemy combatants. And so the fact that we have held them for such a long period of time, and that there's very little hope of them being released anytime soon because of congressional restrictions on transfers of Guantanamo detainees, I think that's the major driving force behind this hunger strike. And we should not, so this is not a case of convicted prisoners who are protesting some conditions. This is a case of people who are primarily cleared for release, waiting to go home, and simply cannot go home because Congress has passed these legislative restrictions on transfer.
Back in the end of the first Gulf War, thousands of Iraqi lawful combatant prisoners of war were released back to Iraq through a third party within days. The Geneva Conventions were written to protect innocent civilians in time of war, not to protect those who would pretend to be civilians in order to kill them. That was the auspices under which these detainees were captured on the battlefield and other circumstances.
Yeah, but how do we know
whether they're civilians or whether they're
pretending to be civilians unless we try them?
And I also want to...
Well, they're not entitled to extra legal privileges. However, in the...
Look, you're not a lawyer, and you don't know what you're talking about. At the time that you were in Guantanamo, the United States did not even apply the Geneva Convention. The United States was denying that the Geneva Convention...
unit for 9 years and worked at Gitmo and Abu Ghraib and all the prisons in Iraq.
Hang on. One at a time. David, go.
Okay. Montgomery is not an expert on the law here. I'm the expert on the law, and Partis is the expert on the law, and he's misstating the law. So the Geneva Conventions are there to protect people who are detained during wartime.